Hello, welcome to my video on the growth of sects and cults. So this is obviously just a continuation of our discussion of the typologies in reference to obviously Trotsky and Nabier's typologies which they've created for sects and cults and how they're defined. Now this is really going to be just a continuation of that discussion as to why they've continued to grow as a result. So what conditions in society have resulted in the growth of these sects and cults, and particularly in terms of membership. So as we know, we had clear definitions for churches, denominations and sects. And from the 1960s and 70s, we really saw a massive increase of new religious movements, which we had to create a new typology for it, which was called cults. Now, this new typology really helped us try to explain the differences between sects and cults. And between each one of them, they had key characteristics which really demonstrated their clear individual points in terms of their relationship with society and what they demanded from their members. So obviously from this, the growth is explained in terms of why individuals join these groups and how this related to social change in that current climate or environment. Now, the sheer reason as to why individuals join these groups and what social changes happen in society to enable these groups to grow are really the key characteristics which we're going to be examining. Now, this will obviously influence the number of potential recruits that they'll have for their cults, etc. And then this is reflected in the growth of new religious movements as a result. So we'll carry on discussing this and looking at it deeper now. Now, what you can clearly see from this graph, or this table as it were, you can see that from 1995 you had members here. So we had 14,350 members. Now, in terms of the new groups that have emerged within that time frame, there were none noted down. Now, the interesting thing to note down here is typology might not have been updated, so we might not have been able to recognize them as new religious movements because they may have fallen in within the denomination type typology. Now, from 2000, we had 29,503 members and a growth of 775 new religious movements as a result. In 2005, we had 37,412 members join, which is obviously the biggest increase that we've seen from 1995. So this is almost, well, over doubled what the membership rate once was. Now, the new religious groups has also significantly increased by 829. Now, if we're going to take these trends as literally as we've seen on this table, then we should continue to see a continued increase in terms of memberships of these new religious movements, as well as new religious movements emerging as well. Now, between 1995 and 2005, the number of Scientologists also grew. So we had 121,800 to 165,000 new members. Now, obviously from this, we can see that, okay, people are joining these new groups. Now, what are they offering these particular new members in order to enable them to feel like they are more joined in terms of community and society? Now, these figures for Scientologists, obviously we need to take a bit of caution when we're applying them, because if you pay to do a Scientologist course, you're automatically classified as an active member. So these statistics in terms of what we're looking at may be over-exacerbated or overly explained. Now, the Unificationists, or otherwise known as the Moonies, have more than trebled to 1,200 members. Now, this is a small group. Significantly, it was primarily focused in Asian communities, and it is obviously interesting to see that it's increased towards our side of the world. However, what we need to recognise is some of these groups are not always based off of new ideology or new doctrine. For example, we've got non-Trinitarian groups, which are often based off Christian doctrine in terms of taking the traditional line, when the Bible states an eye for an eye, taking it quite literally. Now, these groups would be considered as new religious movements as well. Now, what we can see is that these groups have around 547,000 members in 2005. So significantly, it has got a large number of people which are interested and within absorbing that doctrine that the non-Trinitarian groups are offering. Now, we're going to break this topic up into 5 different headings here. So we've got marginality, relative deprivation, social change, the growth of new religious movements, and long-lived sects. Now, all of which we're going to look at and discuss in a lot of detail. Well, an ample amount of detail. Now, marginality here. Now, the main person that really starts to discuss this was Max Weber, who was the first person to really have that key discussion around sex. Now, he states that sex developed amongst the marginal groups in society. Now, these are the groups that are outside of mainstream society, that are looking to belong, and they do not feel like they've got the appropriate status or economic rewards from society. So they're going to search for a group by which is going to offer them some sort of solace or some sort of support network to make them feel better about this. So there is a massive keyword that's going to be coming up now. Now, this keyword, I really emphasize that you have to pay attention to it. Now, these sects developed as a result of a theodicy of disprivilege. Now, this is a religious explanation and justification of the disadvantage and promising salvation, often in the afterlife. Now, as we know in terms of Calvinism, this was the case because the theodicy of disprivilege simply justified the fact that, okay, I've been put on this earth to work, and I will do whatever I can to try remedy this and ensure that I live an ascetic lifestyle, in which then ensure that my salvation panic is met, therefore meaning that I will no longer have that worry about where I'll end up in the afterlife. Now, this is arguable what Max Weber is stating about these sects and cults. They have developed this theodicy of disprivilege, which allows those individuals to justify their position and feel like something good is going to happen to them in their afterlife. Now, this marginality which we're talking about, Brian Wilson really argues that situations such as being defeated in war, natural disasters, and economic collapse could lead to a group becoming marginalised and turning to new religious groups, and purely because those groups will now be able to support them and provide them with a belief system which will help them through the troublesome times in which they are encountering. So this is a very interesting angle in which we've looked at. Now, really to demonstrate this point, in the USA in the 1960s, the growth of sects such as Black Muslims was accomplished through the recruitment of disadvantaged and vulnerable members. These were people that were obviously separated from mainstream society and made to feel like they could not be fulfilled or part of that mainstream community. Obviously due to their ethnicity and as well as their religious belief systems. So what they did is they turned to a system by which provided them with that support, that doctrine, which then has made them feel supported, as well as justifying their disadvantage to an extent. However, this is not always the case, as most of the members of world-rejecting cults are from young, white and middle-class people. As we like to call them in lesson, the eat, pray, love generation. They are the people that are feeling like they have got the time to explore and go out further. Now, that is what we've got to take that into account. As when we're really looking at the growth and the marginality of the groups, it's not always going to be those who feel that they are disconnected from society due to legitimate reasons. It can just be those who feel that spiritually they are not connected to the mainstream path of society. Now, Wallace 1984 does not believe that those characteristics contradict the marginality theory, as many of them belong to marginal groups in society because they were hippies, dropouts, surfers, LSD and marijuana users. So therefore, even though they were white middle class, they were still from a very big subsection in terms of society. They were those that were seemingly disadvantaged and looked down upon. Now, obviously, there is a please note on the bottom of the screen here, which says the arguments about marginality and relative deprivation linked to the views of Marxism, as religion is a response to disadvantage and oppression, but develop this argument as disadvantage can be relative rather than absolute. And we're going to look into that in a bit more detail later on within this PowerPoint. Now we're going to look at relative deprivation. Now, the poor are more deprived than the middle class. Now, this is clearly just an objective statement here. The poor, materially, are actually worse off than the middle class, whilst the middle class seemingly argue that they are more deprived than the poor. Now, this is a highly subjective statement because in order for us to really analyse this, why are they disadvantaged? Now, they seemingly be in comparison between the poor and obviously the middle class. In terms of church attendance, the poor generally are more willing to attend church. That's obviously, if we're going to look at stereotypical backgrounds here, that the pure simple reason being why is that the church provides them with some form of comfort. It justifies their poverty, their oppression that they're feeling, their low paid menial jobs. Meanwhile, the middle class, they don't go to that. They don't have a reason to go to these churches to look for this salvation. So they are starting to feel like, hey, we are the deprived ones here. And that is because spiritually, we are not being as satisfied as what the poor are. Now, meaning that they feel that they're not deprived in terms of material terms, but they are spiritually deprived. So we've really got to take that emphasis there that, okay, there's an objective point here, and then there's a highly subjective viewpoint here. And this obviously can emerge due to the changing narrative in terms of society, particularly when we're entering into a postmodern society, by which a pick and mix, spiritual shopper type culture really starts to emerge, which really emphasizes why these people may feel that mainstream society, churches and religions are no longer quenching this thirst. Now, the middle class, they see the world as materialistic, lonely and impersonal, woe betide the 1% here. Whilst the reason why they're turning to this sect is because it offers them a community in which they crave. It offers them a group of people by which provide them support and friendship and relationships, which they just generally just do not get from mainstream society. Now, Wallace argued that in the 1960s, a significant number of young people felt spiritually deprived in a world that they saw as too materialistic and impersonal. Now, sects and cults offered these young people the opportunity to gain a sense of spiritual wholeness, or simply to quench that spiritual thirst in which they are craving, because they feel like, hey, we don't have any form of salvation, any form of support in terms of religion. And this is why we're going to turn to these world-rejecting cults. This is why we're going to turn to these sects, because they offer us answers to the existential questions of our lives. Now, the Methodist movement is an example of this, as it started off originally as a sect, and then it was a response to the working class and a rapid industrialisation of society. So the working class sought the sect because it provided them with a sense of community, and it provided them with a bubble by which everyone could communicate with whilst this change was happening within their society. So they could start to make sense of what was happening around them together. Now, this obviously offered a multitude of support services for the individual. Counselling, caring, education, everything like that was answered for. Now, this is why we turn to it, because they are providing us with a care network by which maybe mainstream society, mainstream religions do not offer us. Now, really filtering off that point of the Methodist movement there, it moved in terms of a sect because it was helping individuals deal with the social change, the rapid industrialisation which was happening within their society. Now, Bruce sees development of cults and sects as a reaction to modernisation and secularisation. Now, obviously, the separation of church and state could be quite worrying, and therefore we might be turning to these movements to try answer some of those questions in which we've got. Now, as traditional institutions have lost influence, meaning individuals are willing to explore alternative religions to provide answers to the existential questions of life as a result. Now, more recently, as people have lost strong beliefs and commitments, cults have become popular because they generally require sacrifices and little religious observance when compared to churches and denominations. Meaning that we can go to a cult, we can attend it, meaning that we've got the community, but I don't actually have to commit myself as much as I potentially have to do in terms of time-wise, etc., to my new religion, so the cult, because I just don't have the time to, but monetary or money-wise, I am able to do so. Now, Wallace in 1984 argues that new religious movements were attractive to young people in the 60s because they offered a more spiritual and a caring way of life. Now, really, this is where our Eat, Pray, Love generation really is starting to emerge, by which they are searching for that spiritual wholeness by which the normal traditional church is no longer offering them. So in addition to this, Wallace identified 3 reasons as to how these institutions provided alternative way of life for these young people. Now, we're going to look through these 3 explanations now. Now, the growth of new religious movements. So the first point here is, with the growth of higher education, this left an extended transition period between adolescence and adulthood. Now, this is an interesting trend that's happened within our society. This means young people have got this extended period of adolescence by which they don't have to go out and get a career and get the responsibility. Instead, they can go out and explore. The gap year student can really start to be a perfect example of this. And that means that these people are able to go and explore and look and search for that spiritual thirst and get it quenched when they're going on their gap year to Thailand, etc. Next point, a belief that new technology would lead to an end of scarcity and the need for commitment to hard work. Meaning that, okay, technology is going to offer us instant gratification and instant dialogue with a new religious movement, which means that we won't have to worry about all the sacred nonsense, as it were, because I can become an expert in Buddhism just by reading a Wikipedia article in this sense. So it means that we've got this instant access to technology, which then allows us to explore, allows us to research, it allows us to gain an understanding of religions which may not necessarily belong to our mainstream society. Now, the growth of radical political movements which provide an alternative to dominant social norms as well could mean the reasons for these new growth of these new religious movements. Now, for that, it's obviously a response to how society might change. So therefore, we need to create this new movements by which can help the members of this group feel united and feel that some form of change is happening in society due to their political influence. Now, new religious movements offered the possibility of a more spiritual and caring way of life through these reasons identified by Wallace. Now, all of those reasons are absolutely essential when we're looking at the growth of these new religious movements, because the fact that we're looking at young people that have got this extended period, we've got new technology, and we've got rapid change, which has got new radical political movements emerging. All 3 of those factors could be the reason why these new religious movements are increasing, because they are providing individuals a mean of dialogue and communication with each other, which then enables them to search out and look for a belief system which is a best fit for their scenario or their current lifestyle. Now, Bruce sees a particular appeal of world-rejecting new religious movements as deriving from the failure of the youth counterculture to radically change the world. Because if we look at the hippies wanted to change the world. They wanted complete nuclear disarmament, etc. And obviously we live in a world where that has not happened, unfortunately. Now, this meant that this subsection of society have been left completely disillusioned, and they may seek other forms of salvation in terms of new religious movements, which offer them a new form of peace in which they can gather from this new community, a new form of identity, as it were, which would be absolutely essential to them progressing on and becoming more of a productive member of society. Now, world-affirming new religious movements tend to appeal to those aspiring to be successful whilst they still seeking a spiritual side to their lives. So they're going to be the people that still want to have the money and want the wealth, but they want the spiritual quenching, the spiritual thirst to be met as well. Now, Bruce in 1996 argues that world-affirming new religious movements are a result of the world being rationalised, in which organisations and people are primarily concerned with fulfilling and meeting certain objectives rather than spiritual development in itself. So it's all about what I can get from the religion and how that will benefit me, rather than how I can develop as an individual in terms of my spiritual growth and understanding. meaning this movement has grown as a result of individuals being unable to gain satisfaction and gain a sense of identity from the contemporary society. Now they no longer feel a calling about their work and may not identify strongly with their workmates, meaning that these new religious movements will provide them with that sense of belonging by which they do not have in mainstream society. Meaning that these world-affirming new religious movements offer a solution to that problem. They offer people both success and a spiritual element to their lives by which they are absolutely desperate for, meaning that they are plugging the gaps in the individual's lives and therefore providing that glue which holds that individual's identity and personality together. Now for the last slide. So obviously the middle ground groups, which we're going to look at more in the next couple of videos, really started to gain a bit of movement in terms of mid-1970s, as there was a huge amount of economic unrest, so the recession really hit into place, and that meant that we entered a period of austerity, meaning that social policy and political groups and ideology would be aimed towards trying to save money, trying to get the economic base and the economy back to its fully functioning what it once was. Now, Wallace in 1984 argues that these groups appealed mainly to former young dropouts who sought a path back towards full participation in society, meaning that they thought, okay, we join these groups because they will offer us success and they'll offer us a way and means for us to get back to the ideal image of what my mum and dad did, which is contribute to society and be fully aware of the community in which I belong in. Now, if you've got any questions, you know the various sources that you can hit me up on. So I've obviously got my email address and I've got Twitter by which you can use. Any questions, let me know and I'm happy to help. Thank you.